We interrupt this program to bring you a special report from News 5.
It may be the most senseless tragedy to have ever hit Clare County, Michigan.
At least 6 people have been killed in Clare County.
The road leading to the home of Mr. and Mrs. George Post was cordoned off throughout the night. Near dawn, the gruesome story began to unfold. Here in a house in Surrey Township near the village of Lake, 7 people had been shot to death around 6 o'clock last night. 3 of them were only children.
7 people lie dead at a farmhouse near Farwell, Michigan in 1982. The victims include 3 children. Only a monster full of hate and evil could do something like this. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case known as the Rock Road Massacre. Viewer discretion is advised. At approximately 6:30 p.m. on February 16, 1982, a woman named Alice Russell would arrive at her family's farmhouse near Farwell, Michigan, with her husband and their 2 kids. When they got there, the family's 3 dogs were chained up outside like they normally were, and they were barking. Not considered unusual to them because, this particular evening there was a family reunion going on, so there were supposed to be a lot of people, and the dogs would typically bark. Now, at this point in the evening, the reunion was supposed to be already in full swing, but when Alice and her family arrived, they didn't hear anything. There were no voices coming from inside the house, no laughter, no chattering. Dead silent. They also noticed that the lights inside the house appeared to be off, which is also something a little strange. So Alice and her family, they would enter the home through a side door which goes into the home's kitchen. The kitchen is pitch dark, so Alice turns, flips the switch on, and in that moment, Alice would discover that the majority of her family was gone forever. 22-year-old Garnetta Ronning was born and raised in Michigan. I don't know a whole lot about her life, unfortunately, but her mother, Vaudrey, at some point down the road, would remarry. And she married a man named George W. Post. Now, George, who already had 7 kids of his own, took in Garnetta as his stepdaughter very happily. And he was thrilled to have another child, in his life. Life wasn't always perfect in sunshine and butterflies. As a matter of fact, one occasion, Garnetta, at the age of 15, she was caught by George having inappropriate relations with a young boy. And so George went to Vaudrey, her mother, and then Garnetta said, he's lying. It was George. He actually tried to sexually assault me. Whoa. Something she would quickly go on to recant, and she lied because she didn't want to get in trouble. Okay. About a year or so after that, when she was 16 years old, Garnetta would end up getting a job. She had become a waitress. This was at a place called K&A Chow House, which was in nearby Loomis, Michigan. Garnetta would actually work there for quite some time. Several years later, around 1977, she was still there as a waitress. She, at this point, was 19 years old, and one day, a 27-year-old man walked in, and his name was Robert Lee Haggart, and apparently he, I guess it was love at first sight for him. When he saw Garnetta, and so what he did was he continued to go to the restaurant every single day, probably ordering the same thing and probably only going there when he knew Garnetta was working, and eventually he worked up the courage to ask her out, and she said yes. Very quickly after this, Garnetta got pregnant. She was not ready to have a child. So she got an abortion. Now, this was not to Robert's knowledge. He had no idea she was doing that. But eventually he found out, and he got really pissed that he wasn't included in that decision, and he wanted a child. So the two of them basically ended up kind of drifting apart and splitting up. But a couple of years later, the two of them would rekindle their old relationship in 1980, and they moved in together. And then in February of 1981, they got hitched. But very quickly, the marriage was off to a very rocky start. Garnetta had suspected that Robert was possibly being unfaithful. At the very least, he was spending basically every single night out at bars and spending their money on booze and other things, money they didn't really have, and that it irritated her. It's basically believed that Garnetta had confronted him, and then the very next day, she came into work with a very bruised face. This is because Robert beat the shit out of her. And around the same time, she also found out that Robert, who was working at like some sort of pig farm or something like that, well, he had tried to purchase some cattle for $17,000, and he did so by knowingly writing a check that he knew would bounce. And this would actually end up getting him on police radar. And so basically at that point, Garnetta filed for divorce and she moved out. So when she moved out and said, hey, we're divorcing, and when this whole bounce check thing happened and the police were wanting to question him about it, he basically fled. He would leave Michigan and go to Tennessee. Robert Lee Haggart was born in Michigan in 1950. Again, not a whole lot of information about him either. But it all seems like he had a pretty normal childhood. He grew up in a normal, decent home. He would go to school, graduate high school, and then he would enlist in the Army, where he was a sharpshooter. He would do a tour in Germany and Vietnam, where he was praised for his sharpshooting skills. And then eventually he would be discharged from the Army, honorably, as far as I can tell. Shortly after being discharged from the Army, though, it appears that he had taken up a love for drinking lots of booze, became kind of a borderline alcoholic, and this led to more issues. One day at a wedding reception, he got super drunk, and he was caught having relations with a 14-year-old girl. He got arrested for that, and unbelievably, they let him take a plea deal for this, and the charges were taking indecent liberties. Never in my life heard of that. And he was sentenced to 3 years probation. Never spent a day in prison for this act. And because he was a free man, well, he was allowed to then sexually assault another woman. He promptly got caught for this, and he served a long time in prison, right? No, 2 years. 2 years for assaulting a woman. And then he would end up meeting Garnetta, because he moved back to Michigan in 1977. So, now getting back to 1981, the two of them they're separated. He's in Tennessee. Garnetta has actually now moved to Florida. And it appears that they've all gone their separate ways, and pretty much we got to get the divorce finalized, but after that, we're done. But their divorce wasn't final yet, and basically the courts had set a hearing date to finalize the divorce in February of 1982. And that would eventually lead to a massacre. The court set a date of February 17th, 1982 for the divorce hearing. So now Garnetta is coming home from Florida, and Robert is taking a bus from Tennessee to Michigan. Now, because 22-year-old Garnetta was coming home, George Post decided, hey, let's throw a big family reunion. Let's have a big family party since, everyone will be here now. George Post and his family lived in a 56-acre farm property in Clare County, Michigan, which was, I guess, just a little outside of the town of Farwell. Farwell, Michigan at the time was a teeny tiny little town that consisted of literally like 700 people, and that was it. This is like one of those towns where pretty much everybody really truly did know everybody. George Post at the time was 53 years old, and he was the town's postman. His last name was Post, and he was the postman. That's pretty neat. Now, like I said earlier, he had 7 kids. He was treasurer of the local school board. He donated cattle and pigs. He was just an all-around, well-respected guy in the community. Everyone knew him. Everyone loved him. Everyone loved the whole family. So it's believed that at approximately 5 p.m. on February 16th, 1982, the day before the whole court proceedings were to happen, George was at the farmhouse property, and he was sort of getting things ready for the reunion, which was going to be happening that evening. At that same time, one of his daughters, which is 29-year-old Helen Gaffney, she was also there with her 4 children, and I don't think her husband or boyfriend or whatever, I don't think he was there at all. Garnetta and her mother, Vaudrey, had been out shopping, I guess getting some last-minute things. And so, at around 5 p.m., George had gone down to the basement. And unbeknownst to him, waiting in the basement was Robert Haggart. Robert was holding one of George's shotguns. And then something led to something, and Robert shot George Post, and he fell to the ground dead. At this point, it's believed that this is when Helen heard a commotion. She also heard the gunshot, and then she immediately took her kids and ran out of the house. And they got into the pickup truck that they were using. And her intent obviously was to try to flee the area because she was scared, and the kids were scared because they heard a gunshot right close by. And unfortunately, it's obvious that Robert saw this. So he ran out of the farmhouse, armed with a shotgun in one hand and a handgun in the other. He then pointed both guns at the truck with the people inside it now, and he just began to fire and just riddled the truck with bullets. The truck never got a chance to speed away. When all of a sudden blood was basically pouring out of the truck and just sort of covering the snow beneath, Robert at that point decided to take some clean snow, covered up the bloody snow to make it look like nothing was wrong. He then goes back into the house, into the kitchen. He turns off all of the lights, and he just lies in wait because at that point, Vaudrey and Garnetta were still out. It's believed they got home sometime between roughly 5:15 and 6:30 p.m. They don't know exactly when, but obviously they got home. When they walked into the house through the kitchen outside door, they must have turned on the light, saw Robert, and Robert opened fire on both of them and shot both Vaudrey and Garnetta dead. Robert then steals Vaudrey's car, and he flees the scene. And it's believed that just a few short minutes after he fled, one of George Post's other daughters, Alice, had arrived to the farmhouse with her family to join in on the reunion festivities. And that's when they walked into the kitchen, turned on the lights, because Robert must have turned them back off, and she found the bodies of the 2 women in the kitchen. They panic, they call 911 immediately, police arrive, and they find more bodies. They find George Post just at the foot of the stairs of the basement. And then in the pickup truck outside the house, they find 4 more bodies. Helen and 3 of her 4 children had been shot dead in the truck, and they were all slumped over. 10-year-old Angela, 8-year-old Tom, and 7-year-old Amy were deceased. Lying on the floor of the truck was a 15-month-old baby. The baby was still alive. As a matter of fact, the baby was relatively unharmed, but she was covered head to toe in the blood of her mother and siblings, and her mother was basically lying on top of her, and it's believed that Helen had done that on purpose to try to shield her children from the bullets. Unfortunately, it did not work completely, but she did likely save the life of her 15-month-old baby. The baby was basically had her arms around and clutching one of her sisters. The 57-acre farm was located on 5603 Rock Road. Basically, immediately the media would call this the Rock Road Massacre. Robert Haggart had, like I said, stolen Vaudrey's vehicle, which was a 1980 Buick LeSabre. He drove all the way back to Tennessee, where he would go to a restaurant that was owned by his friend and roommate, and he was go there to shoot the shit and eat after he just brutally murdered 7 people. And the roommate slash friend looked out and saw the vehicle that Robert came in. He made note of it because also playing on the TV, on the news, was the story of the Rock Road Massacre.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report from News 5.
It may be the most senseless tragedy to have ever hit Clare County, Michigan.
At least 6 people have been killed in Clare County.
The road leading to the home of Mr. and Mrs. George Post was cordoned off throughout the night. Near dawn, the gruesome story began to unfold. Here in a house in Surrey Township near the village of Lake, 7 people had been shot to death around 6 o'clock last night. 3 of them were only children.
That showed the victims' faces and showed the stolen vehicle. And the friend was like, okay, well, Robert knows this family pretty well, and also he is driving that exact car. So the friend calls the police to rat his friend out. Good. Robert, I think, overhears this or something. He then leaves the restaurant, gets into the car, and begins to speed away. Police at this point, though, are already setting up roadblocks all over the area to catch this man. And he gets basically stuck at one of those roadblocks, and he tries to back up. But as he's doing that, there's like a slew of officers just pointing guns directly at him. So he's like, oh, shit, okay. And then he stops. And apparently, even though he had a gun in his hand at that point, he put it down and decided to surrender. Police would eventually find a pair of bloody jeans at Robert Haggart's house. And the blood on the jeans, I guess, had some sort of... They tested it with whatever testing they could do in 1982. Something to do with the blood type that was super uncommon, super rare, that matched the same blood type that one of the victims at the farmhouse had. And only one of them had that blood type. And so that was pretty, kind of almost to them at the time, pretty conclusive that the blood on his jeans came from the victims. And they were confirmed to be his jeans. And it was a lot of blood all over them as well. They also, so when he was arrested, he had a gun in his car. And they basically took some of the bullets they recovered from the crime scene were exact matches to bullets that would have been fired from this gun. So it was his gun that they could confirm were the ones to shoot some of the victims. He apparently used a shotgun, a handgun, and at one point he used a rifle. They also had many witnesses who could place Robert at or near the farmhouse during when the murders would have happened. He did get on a bus on February 15th from Tennessee. They confirmed that with the bus ticket. They confirmed with witnesses, the bus driver who can confirm he was on it. And he got there about a day early before the court proceedings was supposed to happen. Again, many people placed him there. So they knew he was there when the murders took place. There was no questions about it. Not to mention, he was in possession of, when he was arrested, of the stolen vehicle. Vaudrey's car. He could have only gotten that from the farmhouse after she was killed. So basically, it's a slam dunk. So he is now charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder for the baby. The trial goes on. They put up all the witnesses who can place him there. They put the testimony from the experts about the blood found on the jeans, and they testify about the stolen car and all of this. And basically, they're trying. The defense is like, well, what will his motive be? And honestly, the motive was never truly established at trial. It's only basically assumed that it had something to do with the divorce. But they weren't really able to truly establish that because they didn't really actually have proof of the actual motive he had. Because at the time, he never said anything. Robert claimed during a police interview that he got to the farmhouse after they were all dead. They were already dead when I got there. And so I just stole a car and left. What? You go to a farmhouse, see 7 bodies, and you do nothing, and you're not guilty, so you steal a car? And what? Literally makes no sense. And literally, no one bought it. But oddly enough, the defense did not put him on the stand. He didn't testify. As a matter of fact, the defense put up no witnesses. They put up no experts. They put up nobody. They basically did not even try his case. They were working under the idea that it's the prosecution's job to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And pretty much they did that. And so the defense still sat there. I'm like, man, we got nothing. And I think it's because it's clear that he did it. And they just didn't have a defense. So the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder for 6 of the victims. For one of the victims, they only found him guilty of second-degree murder. And the reasoning they gave was because of the fact that they could not determine what his intentions were that day, what his motive was, because they could not prove that he actually planned this. They weren't sure if this was a spur of the moment type thing. That's why they went with second degree murder with one of the kids. I don't know why they didn't do that with the rest. I don't know. But he was convicted on all the charges, and the judge would sentence him to 7 life sentences, plus an additional 32 years for the attempted murder. But, it's very unclear as to why he did this. Garnetta was the one to file for divorce, but he appeared to have moved on. He moved out of state. He got a girlfriend. He had a new girlfriend named Linda. I guess they were happy together. As a matter of fact, she was in the car with him when he got arrested. She wasn't charged with anything. But I don't know. Was this something where... And I think later on, I think I might have seen or saw a video or something that said that he eventually would kind of suggest that this was one of those, well, one thing led to the other. So what I'm thinking is maybe he went to the farmhouse to confront Garnetta, and she wasn't there, but George was, and maybe he and George got into some sort of argument, which led to Robert picking up the shotgun and out of reaction just shot George. Well, Helen and her kids are there now, so great. They probably know he's there, and now they're witnesses. So now he needed to eliminate them. And then, well, crap, when Garnetta and Vaudry get home, they're going to know who did this. They're going to think it's me. Now I got to take them out. So he waited for them to come home and shot both of them. Could very easily be that kind of situation where this was just completely unplanned. He's clearly very unhinged, and he's a monster, but it doesn't necessarily mean he planned it ahead of time. But it doesn't really matter because he spent the rest of his life in prison. Because in November of 2002, Robert Lee Haggart died of natural causes in prison at the age of 53. Now, at some point during this, Robert Haggart was required to provide his DNA. This is just one of those things that in the legal system you have to do. In 2009, 7 years after Robert's death, there was a CODIS hit from his DNA matching the DNA found at a cold case sexual assault and murder from way back in 1977. In October of 1977, the body of a woman named Dorris Arndt was found just dumped on the side of the road off the I-75 in Michigan. Now, when she was found, police started their investigation, and actually Robert Haggart was considered a person of interest in that case. This is because several witnesses placed Robert at a bar the same night as Dorris, and they were actually even interacting with one another. And so police questioned him, and at that time he had just started dating Garnetta. And so they even questioned Garnetta and asked like if they knew where he was during these times. And apparently nothing was ever truly established to physically connect him to the murder of Dorris. They, unfortunately, lacking physical evidence, they did collect the DNA, but in 1977 it meant absolutely nothing. They had nothing to arrest him on. They only had their suspicions. And so finally in 2009, they got that hit. So it turns out he was a murderer the entire time. But at least Dorris's family, I hope, to those who may still be around, were given some kind of closure about her murder. And, they can rest now that her killer is boiling in the rusty cauldrons of hell. So, yay! This is another one of these stories, and I've told many of these, and I'm sure you've heard many more, where there is a guy who was clearly a problematic person. He had been caught having relations with a child when he was an adult. He was in his mid-20s. He got no time for that. They basically gave him a very minor little on the wrist for it. And then, because he wasn't in jail for that, he would go on to sexually assault another woman. And of course, they sentenced him to 2.5 years. He only served 2 of those years. So he got, 6 months, got out 6 months early. It's another situation where the justice system's failed. This guy was clearly a menace, a predator, and at one point a killer. And they had suspicions that he was a killer, but no proof. This is just another, once again, it's like this happens so much where they're not punished enough for their actions. And it would lead to several murders. Hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. There's just nothing we can do about it now, other than maybe hopefully learn from these mistakes, possibly, and maybe put these people in prison for longer. I don't know. This man murdered 7 people, he including 3 children, and he managed to kill a 4th child. For what? He just casually killed 7 people like it was nothing. I don't understand it. I never will. But that is it for this case. I hope you found it interesting. This may be slightly shorter than normal. I couldn't find a whole ton of information on this one, but I did my darndest. As usual, if you have tripped, fallen, and stumbled into this video purely by accident, hi, I'm Mike. I tell true crime stories, obviously. And I tell 4 of them a week here on YouTube. I also tell 1 a week now on Thursdays on Instagram, 1 a week now on Facebook on Fridays, and then 1 a week now on TikTok on Saturdays. And I do go live every once in a while on both on here and TikTok. So all my links to all those other places are in the description in the link tree below. Stop it. So yeah, check me out. Subscribe here. Give the video a like. Follow me everywhere. Do what you gotta do. I don't know. Next, if you have a case you would like to see me cover on any of these platforms, my case list is in the link tree below. Check that first. Make sure the name you want me to cover isn't already there, and if it isn't, email me. The info is below. and just send me the name, where it happened, when it happened, and eventually I will add it to my list. If you already see the name there, please do not email it to me. It's already there. I choose my cases at random as best as I can. So it will eventually get covered. I just don't know when. Next, if you want to support me in any way, we do sell merch that we do ship internationally. My buddy Adam, my very good friend, he makes it all himself. He ships it all himself. It's in the link tree below. We sell shirts and hoodies and wine glass and stuff like that. So yeah, go ahead and do that if you want. Lastly, I have a Discord server if you want to join it. It's also in the link tree below. Please be over the age of 18 or else you'll be kicked out, is what that was supposed to say. It is a very quiet and chill Discord, so it's not one of those crazy ones. Yo, I went into Mr. Ballin's Discord. How do you even communicate in that? The moment you type something and hit send, it's gone. Just gone. Like it's 40,000 miles up in the chat because it's crazy busy. But that is it for this video, True Crime Maroonies. And as I always close out every single video, shut up, Mike. I'm very unstable.